So you're starting to notice a bit more nosedive when you're braking, maybe a little bit more bounce whenever you're on the highway, or an increased amount of body roll when you're steering under normal driving conditions. I promise there's still shocks on here, what's left of them anyway. Well, these are all symptoms that point towards your shocks needing some attention, and at worst, needing to be replaced, especially if they're between 35 and 50,000 miles. That's the typical lifespan of a shock. Or maybe you're in the situation where you're researching suspension lifts and you realize some of the high-end brands like TerraFlex, Rockcrawler, Clayton don't actually offer shocks with some of their suspension lifts. And that's intentional. Not everybody who's putting a suspension lift on their vehicle is going to be using it for the same purpose. Some will be slow rolling on the rocks, some will be loaded down with Overland gear, some will be towing, high-speed bombing off-road in the desert, and a lot of us will just be strictly to the highway. And ideally, there is a shock for each one of these driving styles, and they leave it up to you to decide what best suits your driving style. Or maybe you're in this situation, new, used, stock, lifted, doesn't matter. You just don't care for the performance of your current shocks. They're either too soft or they're too firm. Well, regardless of the scenario, there's one common solution, and that's buying new shocks. And in the world of shocks, where there's so many different brands, valve type characteristics, and designs, it can be a bit overwhelming deciding what shock best suits your driving style. For construction, do you go with a steel body or aluminum body? For valving, do you go with digressive, linear, or progressive? For design, do you go with a monotube, remote reservoir, piggyback reservoir, internal or external bypass? I mean, that's the short list. Well, in our situation, we have our tired Fox shocks that came with our Mopar lift, and they definitely need replacement. At least you could see that anyway. And after a little bit of research, we decided to go with a shock that has the capability of 20 different shocks. Want to know what we chose to go with? Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back to the Gator Overland channel. I'm John. In today's video, we'll be doing an evaluation and install of these Falcon 2.3 inch diameter SP2 model 3.3 aluminum body shocks with piggyback reservoir and 3-position compression adjustability. Now, for your viewing convenience today, this video is timestamped, allowing you to go to any point in this video without having to scroll through. I tend to do a lot of research for my videos, and sometimes that can come off as being a little long-winded, but I promise it's all the information you need to know, and it saves some time on your end, especially if you're coming from a Mopar lift. Now, I plan to cover why we're at this point. I'll go over the shocks, then we'll do a little comparison of shocks, then we'll do the install, and then we'll do our evaluation. Now, before I dive off on these shocks, I want to do a little bit of a backstory so you can understand why we're at this point. About 60,000 miles ago, we did the evaluation and install of what we call the ultimate Mopar lift. Basically, we added some Steer Smarts beef to the front end of this to make it a little bit more complete lift and make it more comparable to some of the higher end lifts out there. Especially after installing 37s, you want to upgrade a few of those things and make it a little bit adjustable. And it's been an outstanding ride. I've had over 100 people reach out to me through email, Facebook, with photos and feedback of how much they love this ride. And I have no doubts it's been one of the best riding vehicles I've owned. But the issue that it is, over the past 10,000 miles, I've started to notice an increase in bounce on the highway, a little bit more body roll, and definitely more nosedive. And that just goes to show that these are needing to be replaced. And that lines up with the typical lifespan of 35 to 50,000 miles. Some people claim that they can get more, but it also depends on what you're doing with your vehicle and how you use it. But in our case, they're a little bit soft for what the preference is at this point. So the issue that it is, I want to stay with these shocks, but being that they are a rebuildable shock, they typically run about $75 to $150 for them to rebuild them. You have to pay for shipping both ways, and you can be upward shy of $1,000 just to get some old shocks repaired and put them back on. The other route is going through Mopar Direct. These are proprietary to the Mopar lift. It comes in this box. You can only get them in the lift or through Mopar. Mopar, they're running about $300 to $350 a piece, which puts you around the $1,400 price point. That's kind of a bit up there for just a kind of a shock that's tuned specific to the vehicle and you can only get from one place. I don't want to buy an off-the-shelf shock because typically they are a generic tune. Imagine a 7,000 or 8,000 pound vehicle designed for the generic tune. You put it on a 5,000 pound vehicle, they have all these bullet points that they're supposed to adhere to, and there's no way for you to, you're just vulnerable to it. And we don't want to go with an off-the-shelf shock, at least not directly. So at that point, $1,400, I paid $1,500 for the lift back in 2020, so I might as well buy a whole new lift all over again, get a cool box, swap out the shocks, resell the suspension lift to someone else, let them figure out the shock situation, and be on my way. And I almost did that, but come to find out, as of 2023, the Fox shocks are no longer offered in the Mopar kit. They have now gone to a Bilstein B8 5160. I want to give a shout out to Willie over at Toys for Trucks, which is the new name for four-wheel parts, or at least here in Beaumont it is. And he let me borrow this demo model so I could show you what it comes with now in the Mopar. So that's still a great introductory shock. It's basically the 5100 series that's been upgraded to have the remote reservoir. What that does is that increases the volume of oil in there, which promotes cooling. You're going to have less chance for shock fade. And imagine you having a 2.5 inch diameter here of just a monotube. This is just shy of 2 inches, but the amount of oil between those might actually become more than what's in this. I haven't done the math for the volume, but you know, that is still going to be a great shock for the, I guess, the upgrade on the Mopar. But what I don't care for on the Bilsteins, I've used them in the past. I live here in Southeast Texas. They're made of steel, and steel near salt or anything like that is going to be a pile of red rust, and if it's going to be oxidizing on the outside, you can bet it's going to be oxidizing on the inside. And it's probably not near as bad around here as it is for the people who live in the northern states that salt the roads for ice. And you know, you probably know better than I do that these end up just being rusted. They are a great shock. But what interests me the most about going to a Bilstein from the Fox is they're a digressive valve tune on here. There's still a valve tuning specific to the vehicle. Same thing with the Fox, they're tuned specific to the vehicle, but the digressive tune is the complete other end of the shock spectrum of the Fox tune. So if you don't understand the difference between digressive and linear, linear is going to increase the resistance of the shock as the speed of the shock increases. So it'll start out soft and then increase resistance. This is going to be exactly the opposite. It's going to start out firm, and then as the shock increases speed, it's going to actually digress in the actual resistance. So what you end up getting is a really nice plush ride with Fox. You're going to soak up all those small bumps, big bumps. On the highway, it's going to be nice and plush, but you're going to see a little bit more body roll than maybe some would prefer. And that's usually the only negative factor that a lot of people complain about the Fox is body roll. Digressive in the Bilstein is going to be completely opposite. You're going to be firm forward. You're going to feel a little bit more handling on the road, higher speed, lower speed. You're going to feel like you're cornering and everything is going to be enhanced. But so will be the road, and you're going to feel those bumps. But as you speed up, that will actually digress off. So you're actually going to reduce the amount of body roll. So at some point in time in there, their performances actually cross. But you know, for firm, this is going to be plush, this is going to be firm forward, and that's pretty much the difference. And the only reason why I haven't considered going with the Bilstein is because of the steel. But the issue that it is, we know we want a aluminum body shock, or we preferred it, we want a performance shock, and we want a high volume shock. And that's what put me on to the Falcons. I did a lot of research on this, inquired with about 100 people, and it ended up coming out to an 80-20. People prefer the Falcons over the Fox. Most of the reason why is because of the packaging. You get a small little package like this. The front ones look a little bit different than the back ones, but you don't have to worry about additional parts and the hoses and all that stuff that work with the remote reservoir. And they said that they hold up a little bit better over the long haul. And that's just speculation of what people say, but that's what we ended up deciding to go to. All right, let's talk shocks. Here we have the Falcon 2.3 inch diameter SP2 model 3.3 aluminum body shock, piggyback reservoir, and 3-position compression adjustability. Now, with a piggyback reservoir, it's basically going to operate the same as a remote reservoir, but it's integrated into this machined housing. Makes for a nice little all-inclusive package, and was actually one of the pro points mentioned whenever I was doing my research. And it allows for you not have to worry about locating the remote reservoir on your fender, on your frame, or anything like that. Makes for a real big convenience. It also comes in the nomenclature with a template to allow you to cut out for your fender liner to allow for that to fit with more of like a factory fit finish, which is great. But what you're going to get with a piggyback reservoir or a remote reservoir is additional oil capacity. Additional oil capacity means additional cooling, which means there's going to be less chance for fade, which means the shock just doesn't perform at all. But it also allows for the piston to go further up in the shock, increasing the travel, and typically around 2 inches more travel than the monotube version of the exact same thing. So There you go. That's it. More cooling, more travel equals more flex and better overall for the shock. Now, the 3-position compression adjustability, that is a really cool feature, especially for an off-the-shelf shock. It allows you to dial it in. You have the setting 1, which is going to be the softest, and setting 3, which is going to be the firmest, and setting 2 actually has a really cool feature. You have 8 individual increments that you can actually tune within there. Now, in all my research, about 100 people said that 2.1 to 2.2 is about what they run, all on the same kind of configuration. 3 is a little firm and 2 is definitely soft. So we're gonna check all that out in a little bit, but I think that's really cool that you have basically 10 positions for you to adjust within this one shock. But wait, there's more. If you remember earlier, I mentioned that this had the capability of 20 different shocks. Well, here's 10. What they have actually done is the SP2 stands for basically a 2-speed shock. They have a performance setting and a cold setting. So if we just talk about a general shock for a moment and disregard anything that's going on here, a shock that has an oil field, whenever it gets to below 40 degrees, the actual viscosity of the oil, the properties become more restrictive to flow, which is going to make a soft shock firmer and a firm shock Fred Flintstone, if you get my drift. So what this allows you to do is in the case that you're in the performance setting, from what I understand, the performance setting starting even in the 1 is going to be firmer than anything in the soft setting. So that's going to be for about 10% of us super aggressive off-roaders, maybe towing, and maybe some highway. But a lot of my research shows that a lot of people don't prefer this setting unless you're actually getting into the nitty-gritty with performance on your vehicle. So a lot of us, now 90% of us, are probably going to be in the soft, cold setting. But say you're in the performance setting and temperature goes below 40 degrees or even further than that, and you don't have enough temperature developed just from normal cycling of the shock, it could end up being too firm for comfort on your vehicle. Well, you can dismount your shock from the actual bracket on the axle, let it fully extend, and then rotate it counterclockwise or anti-clockwise for some of you Europeans, and that will actually engage the soft mode. There's an internal bimodal bypass in here that works very much like, think of the top shaker of a Tony Chachere's or Seasoned Salts, where you roll the actual cap and it opens up an orifice, allows you to sprinkle, and then you close it back. That's exactly what's going on in here. So if it's too firm for you in the performance setting, you can actually dismount it, put it in the soft setting, put it back up in, and then from there you can go and readjust up to whatever your firmness is, because even in cold temperatures, the soft setting, you would still be able to get some of the firmness that you had out of the performance. And I think that is one of the main selling points of this particular shock. For me, down in Southeast Texas, we might as well say the soft setting is Texas setting because it never gets cold here, and we want to still have our plush ride. And I just think that having the 20 positions of selectability between the two really makes this stand out against all the other shocks. Plus, we don't have to worry about any corrosion because this is all aluminum. It really checks all the boxes and then some. Now, these shocks are side specific. As you can see right here on the top side, they are embossed. Same thing on the rear shocks. They're in a little bit different configuration, but they are side specific. If you put this on the other side, you would be going the wrong way. So you want to make sure that you look at the nomenclature. I believe this one is a 1. It's going to be a passenger side and 2 for the rear. And then on the other side, it'll be 2 and 1 for the rear. So you have some specifics that you need to pay attention to on the installation point of it. But overall, I think it's going to be a fantastic shock. Now, for you Mojave guys out there, you're going to have to change out this bushing. That's like step number 1 in the instructions. The Mojave runs a 14mm bolt. All other JL, JT applications are going to be a 12mm bolt. So you'll have to upgrade that. There's actually some information that you will be able to upgrade with that. But overall, that's what we're into on this shock, and looking forward to it. It's going to be plug and play, bolts out, bolts in, ready to go. Now that we've talked shocks, let's talk about what comes in the box. And then I'm going to follow that up with a side-by-side comparison spreadsheet. It gives you an idea of a few different brands of shocks when comparing it to the Mopar. But what I think Falcon has done is knocked it out of the park on making it idiot-proof on this installation. Doing shocks is already pretty easy, but if it's to anything to credit and knowing what the rest of their parts, they have suspension lifts and all different kinds of things out there with TerraFlex. If it's this simple and how they set it up, this is awesome. So on every single one of the shocks, you get this nice little badge saying, hey, remind yourself to turn it the right direction before you're putting it in. I think that's great. You get a really cool metal badge right here. It looks like an old mil-spec badge you would see on the dash of a Humvee or something like that. They are a military grade surplus, or at least that's what they derive from, Terraflex and Falcon. It's cool having that little piece of history. I think you could put this on your dash or maybe the door jamb. Just a little reminder. That's pretty cool. Now, no job is complete without having a set of stickers, of course. Now, here's where it really starts to excel. Really simple operation, high color, high detail, and this is telling you how the performance setting and the soft setting work. I think that's a really cool set. Now, as far as off-roading 101, they even include this. How to off-road with basically Jeep tire pressures. Highway 35, 25 for general off-road, and 20 for your rock crawling. Now that's all to your discretion, different tire sizes, different loads on the tires. I do what's called a chalk test method, and it puts me between a 28 and 32 PSI, but this is a good general application. You don't want your tires overinflated because then it's going against the shocks and you're just gonna have a rough ride all the way around. So that's nice to have in there as well. It's going to include this template sheets. Basically the Rubicon and the Mojaves are going to use the same inner fender, and then all the rest of the models, so they are side specific, all in here. I think that's great to have. And the grand finale here, showing you how everything, removing all doubt on how the installation goes. It's really straightforward, but the other really cool thing right here is that big number 3. You get a 3-year warranty with all this stuff, and I think that if you're standing behind your product for what could be upwards of 36 to 40,000 miles for some people, especially using it off-road, that is pretty awesome. Now that we've covered what comes in the box, here is the side-by-side comparison sheet that I put together, and put it up here on the screen. You can stop the screen if you want to, or stop the video if you want to, and look at it. But basically I have the Mopar by comparison, showing the compressed length and the extended length, showing the travel differences, and then how much longer each one of these are going through. Now, an interesting thing to note, all your shocks are going to be lift specific, but when it comes to the Falcons on the front end, all of them are going to be the same. Between the 2-inch all the way up to the 5-inch, all the lengths are going to be the same. That's why it shows them. That's not a misprint. They are the same. That's a good piece of information to have. The reason why I gave that is because Falcon doesn't advertise their compressed and extended lengths, and I think you might need to know that stuff. So for all that right there, they get a big thank you. Don't forget to give them information on what you think of their stuff, or me as well. Let's get the stuff installed. Next up, tools. Now don't let this be intimidating. This is just pretty much every tool that is going to help make your installation go a little bit easier. But changing out shocks is probably one of the easiest modifications you can do on your vehicle. It's literally 2 bolts, one at the top, one at the bottom, bolts out, bolts in. That simple. Really all you need is a combination or a boxed in wrench and a matching set of sockets and a socket wrench, and you can pretty much tackle this whole thing. Now for this installation, it does require a technical tool called a torque wrench. You can rent these at O'Reilly if you don't have one. This one, they run about 70 bucks if you buy them, but if you rent them, you just bring it back and you get your money back. You need one capable of 100 pounds. Now for this installation, there are some fasteners that hold on these roost guards. They're an Allen head, it's a 5/32, and their nomenclature calls for them to be at 30 inch-pounds. Well, I don't have an inch-pound torque wrench. No problem. You divide 30 by 12 inches, 1 foot, 12 inches, and that comes out to 2.5 foot-pounds. Now I have a digital torque wrench here, and it allows for tracking, and all you do is you slide on the roost guard, put thread locker on your bolts, then you put this on there and you turn to 2.5 foot-pounds. That simple. You could probably just do these at the German torque spec, good and tight, and be all good. Now, everything else you see here is just going to be for assisting your installation. The crow's foot, these shocks are under pressure. It's going to be a little bit hard to get into the bracket sometimes, and that could help out. This helping put in the bolts, you might have to knock them in a little bit because they get a little bit of pressure and trying to push it through the hole. And then we have our jack here. You might find that lifting the vehicle by the frame will actually lift the body, and the shock will come closer to the bracket on the axle and make it to where you don't have to push the shock as far up, and it just be a little bit of an assistance. And if you don't have one tall enough, get you a good sturdy block to actually go under there. Other than that, you can go with your impact stuff, make it go a little bit faster, but definitely cinch everything down to the proper torque spec. All you're going to need is an 18 millimeter and a 21 millimeter, and that's it. To remove the shocks, you do not actually have to remove the tire. Yes, it will allow for a lot more room and access, but it's 5 more nuts you have to deal with, plus you have to support the vehicle, and it just sounds like a lot of extra work. It's not necessary. If you want more room, just turn the passenger side wheel towards the driver's side, and vice versa, driver's side towards the passenger if you need access over there. For the front end, it's going to be an 18 millimeter. For the top, it's going to be just a bolt on top, so you'll only need a socket, and down at the bottom you'll need a socket and a wrench to get to those. Now for you Mojave guys, this is going to be a 21 millimeter socket. Now for the rear, it's going to be the same but different. In this case, you can see you have access to the main bolt at the top, but it is not a fixed nut on the back side. You will need a boxed in wrench to get in between here and then access it from there. The bottom side is going to be a nut and bolt just like the bottom on the front. You're going to need a 21 millimeter for all the rear bolts. Now that we got the old shocks out of the way, it's time to go in with these Falcons. Remember, you're going to use all the factory hardware. Up top, it's only a bolt. It's got a fixed nut on the back side. You're going to put it in from the body side first. We're not going to crank down to the foot-pounds yet. We're going to do that once we get both of them in there. Now the rear installation is going to be pretty much the same as the front. It's a little bit different configuration with the piggyback reservoir. You want to make sure that whenever you're putting it in, number 2 is on the rear passenger, and you want the piggyback reservoir on top. That way it's accessible through the fender well. Now, whenever you get it down, same thing. It's going to be specific to how it installs on the bottom end. Choose whether you want to go with the performance setting or the soft setting counterclockwise. And when you do, get it to where your position is done in the direction you need to go. And then whenever you go to fix it up, basically it's going to be like this. You'll have the piggyback reservoir on top, and then the roost guard right here is going with the Falcon facing towards the front of the vehicle. That simple. Now that you have your shocks loosely bolted both top and bottom and you're back down at ride height, you can go ahead and get your 18 millimeter socket. Go ahead and get these things to 56 foot-pounds. Now that you have your shocks loosely affixed at the top and the bottom and you're back down at ride height, go ahead, get your 21 millimeter socket, button these things up at 100 foot-pounds. All right, we have all 4 of our shocks installed, torqued down to spec, didn't run into any issues, and I would factor probably an hour for installation, maybe a little bit faster if you're using all power tools, but the final fit and finish, they look great. Access is easy, and before we hit the road, I want to do a bounce test. I set them all at 2.2, which is what over 100 people reached out saying that they run and find to be their comfort. I'm going to do a side-by-side with our previous, and with this, let's see what it looks like. It stops. Oh wow, that's impressive. And on to the evaluation. For our control group, we did a 10-mile circuit that incorporates highway, rough tarmac, and undeveloped rice field roads, which get pretty rough. We did it on all 10 settings. We had the tires at 30 PSI and did it all at 45 miles per hour, or approximately 45 miles per hour. We started off in the number 1 setting, which is the softest, and it is soft. It feels good. It chews up the bumps, but I wouldn't suggest do it at high speed. We're gonna reserve number 1 for just slow speed negotiations and rock crawling. It's a bit too much body roll for me to be doing it for daily driving or highway. Very comparable to the Fox shocks that we just removed. From there, we went up to the number 3 setting, which is the most firm, and they are firm. It's not uncomfortable firm on the highway, but as soon as we touched off onto the rough tarmac and definitely the undeveloped rice field roads, it's a little bit too firm for comfort, and we're gonna reserve number 3 for just doing highway and possibly towing. Whew, no body roll in that number 3. From there, we went to the 2 setting and I rolled it all the way up to 2.8. That way we could get an idea for the firmest setting in the 2-point settings close to the 3-point settings. It is noticeably less firm than number 3, but it's still going to have the same characteristics, and I'm going to consider it the same thing as 3 and just leave that one to flat road, highway, and towing. It's a little bit too bumpy for you to go with a 2.8 on any of the other roads. I didn't really notice much difference between 2.7 or 2.6. When I got to 2.5, I started to notice that we have a little bit more movement in the shock, a slight increase on the body roll from no body roll at all. And I would be honest, 2.5 was probably the fastest that I would suggest, or I preferred on all this particular 10-mile circuit. It was definitely okay on highway. It was acceptable on the tarmac, which would be like inner city, and I could manage it on the rice field roads, but 2.5 would be my max. From 2.5, I didn't notice much difference between 2.4 and 2.3. But when I got to 2.2, I definitely noticed a lot more travel in the suspension and a little bit of increase in the body roll, the perfect amount of body roll, in my opinion, for the amount of travel that it's in there. And that lines up with what everybody said. 2.2 is pretty much the most popular out of 100 people. I didn't notice anything different between 2.2 and 2.1. So when comparing number 1 setting to the 2.1, 2.2, number 1 definitely has body roll and a lot of suspension travel. That 2.1, 2.2 takes that body roll back down a little bit, makes it very comfortable on the road. Me, honestly, the 2.2 is definitely one of my preferred settings, and then 2.4, because 2.5, I kind of like the firmness, but I didn't notice much difference between 2.4 and 2.3, and it's only 2 clicks away. So I'm in between 2.4 and 2.2, so we just put it on 2.3, and I've been riding on 2.3 now for about 300 miles, and it is perfect. My daily commute incorporates all these terrains that we did for the circuit, and I don't have to worry about getting out of the vehicle feeling too firm. I don't have to worry about slowing down on the rice field roads. It's perfect. I mean, I went from literally feeling like I was driving a boat to feeling like I'm handling like Mario Andretti in a Jeep. It's awesome, to say the least. I'm super proud of the way these things perform. Highly recommend them. They're going to hold up as far as integrity. They're aluminum, they're lightweight, and all the selectability in there is just fantastic. Well, that about wraps things up. And if you made it this far, I probably held you up 20 minutes too long from purchasing your own set of Falcon shocks. If you enjoyed today's video, found it informative or helpful in making your decision to go with a set of Falcon shocks for your vehicle, go ahead, give us a big thumbs up. Let us know how we're doing. Sure, if you'd like, I'd appreciate that. For a heads up on any future installs or adventures, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, notification bell. You can follow us along our journey. Don't forget to check the description below for links to websites for these shocks, as well as contact information should you need to get a hold of me. I want to give a special shout out to Willie over at Toys for Trucks in Beaumont, Texas, for letting me use that Bill Stein demo. And a very special thank you to Jason Viapiano of Bad Attitude Off-Road in Sydney, Ohio. Pretty much every big purchase that I've done on this vehicle has been through Jason, and it's because he offers the best pricing. Not only that, he is a wealth of knowledge. So if you've been looking through Northridge 4x4, Quadratech, 4-wheel parts, go through Jason, because he'll give you the best price and drop ship to your door. Has no problem sending it to me in Texas. He's even helped out one of my friends in Greece. Just let him know John Hartel from Gator Overland sent you, and he'll take care of you. Remember, we at Gator Overland encourage each and every one of you to take a daily moment to unplug and reconnect with the outdoors, even if it's just for a few minutes. Have fun, keep it safe, and just go. Thanks, y'all.